Hi, everyone. This is Sam Collins, your coding and billing expert for the HJ Ross Company, but also ChiroSecure. And welcome to the program for today. I'm happy you're spending some time with me, but I want to make sure that we get your time valued and make sure you're always up to date. That's really what our program is about for today. And for the next, I'm just going to kind of give you some updates. Next year, of course, there are going to be some changes in CPT. There's going to be some new coding there that we're going to make you aware of. So certainly pay attention to upcoming programs. But one thing that's come up recently is dealing with timed physical medicine services. Now, I believe you are all probably aware about time services, but not aware there are two protocols for time. Most of us use the CMS protocol, but now some insurances are beginning to use the AMA protocol. So I want to make sure we're always up to date with what's going on to make sure you know which way to properly document and code it. So let's go to the slides here and let's talk about the AMA, American Medical Association, versus the CMS time services. Please note my email and name there so that make sure you can always, if you need some information, get in contact with me. Bottom line that I want to focus on, though, of course, is this is the number one failed documentation for DCs. As some of you may be aware, I'm on the Coding and Reimbursement Committee for United Healthcare Optum Health. And in this year's meeting, they noted that 48% of the time, DCs fail to properly document time physical medicine services, which means a big problem for us. If you're being audited, of course, if you didn't document the time, there's going to be some refunds or non-payments. One of the things that ChiroSecure is good at doing is making sure you have audit protection. Well, one of the things to do is to make sure you're audit proof so that you don't have to have a problem when audited. So I want to focus in on making sure we have time documentation. Time services, of course, fall into two categories under CPT. You'll see in the left column here, constant attendance. And these are services that, though they are modalities, they require one-on-one attendance. So you'll notice I've highlighted the yellow part, which indicates the 15 minutes. Then, of course, we have the therapeutic procedures, the hands-on, detailed, skilled services. And you'll notice each of these say therapeutic procedures, one or more areas, and of course, 15 minutes. So what we want to get into is, well, what's going on with this 15 minutes and what is physical medicine? Well, one thing, let's define this better. Physical medicine and rehabilitation is actually what you will read in the CPT manual. It is not physical therapy per se. Physical medicine and rehabilitation, also known as physiatry or rehabilitation medicine, aims to enhance and restore functional ability and quality of life with those that have physical impairments or disabilities affecting the brain, the spinal cord, nerves, bones, joints, ligaments, and tendons, and so forth. Realize that chiropractic fits more than 50% of that, obviously. But I want to be careful that we don't use the term physical therapy. It's certainly within the scope of a doctor of chiropractic to perform a variety of physical medicine services. Scope of practice in most states is very broad. However, when using the term physical therapy, that refers to the delivery of these services by a physical therapist. And this is why often you'll see that you can't advertise you do physical therapy. So stick with just it's physical medicine. It's part of your scope of practice. The issue I want to deal with here is just documentation. One thing we have to make clear when you're documenting these services is that they have to be one-on-one. It has to be the doctor or a supervised staff, whether it's a CA, depending on your state, that's been licensed, or just a staff person that's under supervision, but it must be one-on-one. They can only deal with one patient at a time. The service must be such that it's skilled. It can't just be observational. For example, just watching someone exercise would not be skilled, but being intimately involved, making sure they're doing it safely, productively, and so forth would be the skilled part. And of course, these are time dependent. And that time dependence, of course, as you're well aware, is 15 minutes. But as every chiropractor and office staff knows, services aren't always provided in perfect 15-minute increments. In fact, I get nervous when I see an office say they did exactly 15 minutes. Unless you use a timer, I'm not sure that's the case. What then is the threshold for billing? And if it doesn't have to be perfectly 15, this is where the 8-minute rule comes in. Basically, a therapist or the doctor must provide direct one-on-one therapy for at least 8 minutes to receive reimbursement for a time-based code. This is actually true for both CMS and AMA, but what's varied is when you get to the second and third units. So for time documentation, the CMS standard, and realize the CMS standard goes for all federal plans, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage plans, TRICARE, CHAMPUS. This would include TriWest, basically anything that's federally funded. And they use this 8-minute rule where it's real simple. If you have a service that's timed and you spend at least 8 minutes providing it, you may bill 1 unit. But a second unit comes into play when you spent 23 minutes because you have to do 15 plus 8. So it's always 8 to the next. So notice the second unit, 23 to 37. For 3 units, 38 to 52, and so on. It just keeps going up. Where it differs is that the AMA uses what they call the greater than 50% rule, which also means that it's 8 minutes. But what the AMA says is that it requires that any single service cannot be billed unless at least 8 minutes were spent. But it is billable as separate as long as 8 minutes are spent, regardless of the other time services. So as you're well to bill 2 units of, say, 2 separate services, you have to spend at least 23 minutes under the CMS standard. Under the AMA standard, actually, if you spent 8 minutes on one time service and 8 minutes on another, even though it's only 16 minutes, because there's the greater than 50% rule, you may bill one for a unit each. So this time-based standard, why I'm making this an issue, is that just yesterday, the Blue Review out of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois published that they're going to now follow the AMA standard. And so I want to make clear that make sure you find out for your particular carriers which standard do they follow, because certainly this could be a boost for you economically. If your billing codes that are timed, you may find that you may be able to bill more units based on the AMA standard. I won't say that's always, but most often. So what they did on July 22nd this year, they're going back for the measurement of time, and they're going to be using the AMA measurement as opposed to the CMS one. So they're saying here in the third bullet, when billing for time-based codes using the AMA code book, except as required by federal law for Medicare and Medicaid. So they're still not saying this takes over Medicare or the federal plans, but for their plans, so the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. Notice, though, they specifically don't have modalities listed, supervise, but exercise. Okay, gait training, therapeutic activities, and so forth. So services after July 22nd in their grouping is going to allow to follow this new rule. But kind of what I say is my IKEA model. If you've ever bought anything from IKEA, when you open up that instructions, this 8-minute rule may seem easy, but when you open it up, all of a sudden becomes a little bit more complicated. So this is where precisely the AMA diverges. AMA 8-minute rule guidelines cannot use the cumulative time or the remainders to justify billing additional units. So the Medicare methodology does not consider a CPT code billed, rather the total minutes billed one-on-one. It doesn't matter what time you spent on something else. This counts the minutes by CPT codes, which is why utilizing different codes can yield additional units of service. The easiest way, I think, to see that, however, is to simply just look at some coding here based on CMS versus AMA, how to follow. So in the first example on the left side, you'll notice the CMS rule of 8 shows there were 8 minutes spent on exercise, 8 minutes spent on manual therapy, and 8 minutes spent on therapeutic activity for a total time of 24 minutes. But because you've only spent 24 minutes, you may bill only 2 units, as the 8-minute rule for 3 units requires 38 minutes. So what you can do in this case is you may bill 2 units, but meaning 1 unit of exercise and 1 unit of manual therapy, being that they're the 2 more expensive codes, for 1 unit each, but you cannot bill all 3 or 3 units total. But take a look at the AMA protocol on the right. They show 8 minutes of exercise, 8 minutes of manual therapy, and 8 minutes of therapeutic activities, a total time of 24 minutes. You may bill each service for 1 unit because each service stands on its own. So the simplest way to think of it is the AMA rule looks at each code separately. So if I spend 8 minutes doing a single service, that allows me to bill 1 unit. But again, it's that above 50%. So therefore, spending extra time on another service won't count towards it. But at the same token, you only have to meet the minimum standard for each code. So here's another example to show that more clearly. Notice on the left, we have the CMS rule. There is 16 minutes of exercise and 7 minutes of manual therapy. There are 23 minutes spent, so that means a total units of 2. And that's because we've hit the 23-minute threshold. In other words, that 7 minutes counts towards the total, and being that we spent 60 minutes on the first, we've hit our 23-minute threshold. But in the AMA standard, you'll notice 16 minutes on exercise and 7 minutes of manual therapy is only 1 unit of exercise. Manual therapy is not billable because you spent only 7 minutes, not the 8. So that extra time doesn't count. So keep it simple. The extra time of a service does not count towards another service, but stands on its own. If it doesn't hit 8 minutes, not billable. The other factor you have to make sure that you understand clearly with this, though, is just the time of documentation. Whether you're using the AMA or the CMS, and please check with your carriers, the only acceptable methods for billing and documenting is to highlight here the specific number of minutes, by example, stating manual therapy to the lumbar spine for 15 minutes, or listing a begin and end time, such as electric stim to the cervical spine or the neck from 9:30 to 9:45. Notice both are for 15 minutes, but one does from and to, one does minutes. I've seen some carriers seem to not demand, but seem to request that we do from and to time. I have a tendency to believe that if you do from and to time, often you're going to give a more exact amount, because often I think we start rounding with the minutes. By example, what if we did 10 minutes of exercise and 10 minutes of massage? Could we say, well, I think it was like 10 minutes. Well, that would only be one unit under the CMS guidelines. But what if you really did clock time and you honestly spent 11 minutes and 12 minutes? Certainly that could mean still 2 units. Now, again, on the AMA standard, just the 8-minute rule becomes pretty simple. What's not acceptable is documenting time in terms of units in this way. You cannot indicate I did 1 unit of pulsed ultrasound or therapeutic exercise for 1 unit. If you state you're doing 1 unit, you have to still also indicate the number of minutes spent face to face. You also cannot document with a range. And I've seen this quite a bit where doctors say, I'm going to spend between 8 and 20 minutes. Well, certainly you're saying 8 because that's the minimum, but be careful. Tell me how much time you spent. Don't give a range. Or don't do this, which I see a lot with the forms that Chiros uses, often just to check off exercise and indicate ×2. That's not sufficient. To be ×2 would have to be at least 23 minutes, of course. Or again, if we're billing 2 separate services, again, 8 minutes plus 8 minutes. But again, don't document in that way. And of course, don't simply just check off, I did NMR or neuromuscular education or therapeutic exercise. You must indicate, yes, I did this, and it's fine to check off so long as you have a written plan of what that is, but also the time. The big issue I want to make sure you're understanding is that if a plan starts using the AMA guideline, that could be of benefit because each service stands on its own, which means so long as you spend 8 minutes with one service, it is billable, compared to the other. If you do 2 separate services for only 8 minutes, it's not billable. Once you get to billing multiple units of any time service, the 23 minutes still fits, but it's the single service codes that may be of help. What I hope is that you always practice comfortably, always practice with compliance. That's our job. The HJ Ross Company and myself, we do seminars on coding and billing. Please take a look. We've got lots of upcoming programs for you, but also ways just to make sure that you have a good office compliance and can be successful. Take a look. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We post there, not just advertising. What we post are things for you to make sure you got new information. So you'll find a lot of news and other information. We are your resource along with ChiroSecure, and I can't thank them enough for giving me some time, but I also wish you the very best. Next week is going to be Kim Clapp on our program, and I'll see you in a month. This is Sam Collins, the Coding and Billing Expert.